Yo, hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whoever you are, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining me. You are listening to DJ LP on Passion Radio. That's the best radio in town, in the country, in the world. Like, no debating. I am not debating. You are tuned in to DJ LP, and I want to say thank you for joining me. That was Dance Tonight by Lucy Pearl. And yeah, I've got a great show lined up for you. I mean, I say great because it's a subject that I could talk about morning, noon, and night. But, let's see what you think. Today, we are going to be decolonizing grief. Oh, yes. So, the past few weeks, we've been discussing how health and death and grief and funerals are, colonized, how they are controlled, and how every man does his thing a little way different. In the words of one of our saints, Errol Dunkley, who sang quite eloquently, every man do his thing a little way different. And for that reason, we need to be having these conversations. We need to be talking about the way that we do our thing and how we are able to do what we need to do more freely and more easily. So, as I've said, you're listening to DJ LP, but in my normal, everyday, day-to-day work life, I am Laura D. Pusey, and I am a death care practitioner. What does that mean? I hear you say. I've never heard of one of those before. Well, yeah, I'm kind of unique, I suppose. I'm an end of life guide, which means that I help people and families, individuals and groups who are approaching the end of life. And I've written a book called My Life's Tapestry that also helps with this process. It helps us to start talking and discussing and planning for that time. Of course, we never know when that time might come, but surely it's better to be prepared for yourself and for those that love you. I also arrange and conduct funerals. Yes. So I would be that person who stands in place of your pastor or your vicar or your father or your priest. And I perform life-centered funeral services, ones that actually focus on the life of your loved one. There's been too many times when we've gone to funerals and we're like, who are you talking about? And more of us don't really want that kind of funeral service that focuses on the religion. They want to remember the life of their loved one because we have lived. I also am a grief mentor and coach. So I don't call myself a counsellor, and I'll explain why a little bit later as we go through this course. But I don't this show. I don't call myself a funeral counsellor for a good reason. I'm not a counsellor. I am a mentor and a coach. I am the kind of person who will help get you back on your feet, who will help you get your mind straight following the loss of a loved one, and just get you thinking about death from a different perspective. Because I personally believe that the handle that we've got on death is not ours, it's based in fear. And I know that there was a time when we used to celebrate life and we used to recognize and celebrate death as a leveling up, as I suppose you could say coming of age, as a rite of passage. But because we do not overstand anymore, we do not even stand. We understand the directive that has been given to us by people who don't look like us, and we have acquiesced, we have given in, we have decided, or maybe been forced to follow a narrative that isn't ours. So, I am a death care practitioner, and if it's got anything to do with death, then I'm on it like a Scotch bonnet. And for those of you that are not aware of what a Scotch bonnet is, it's pepper. It's pepper. Do I eat it? Probably not really, not really, because it's hot, hot, hot. But, you know, when it comes to subjects like this, dying, death and grief, yeah, call me Mrs. Hot Stuff, not Mrs. Call me Miss Hot Stuff, because that's who I am. It's a subject that I can talk to you about. It is a subject that I can help to guide you through. And it is a subject that I can open your mind to, so that you have a different perspective of what you are experiencing mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually when you lose somebody that you love and care about deeply. Sometimes, you know, even if it's a friend or it's somebody that we work with, we don't really realize the effect that we have on other people's lives until they are no longer with us. And we don't always realize the effect that they have on our lives until they have gone. Is that what I've just said? We don't realize. We don't realize. And so when we grieve, we are missing that which the person brought to our lives. We are missing the essence of who they are. Really and truly, when we grieve, it's because we have lost. We grieve for ourselves. We grieve for a lost relationship. We grieve love, you know, and it appears that all is lost. But perhaps it is not. So this is a brief synopsis, I think, of the work that I do. And I have two websites. One of them is www.dipism.com. Dipism, DIPISM, stands for Death in Practice. So a bit like you go to your doctors. Your doctor is a GP. He is a general practitioner, which means that he kind of covers the board with everything. But then if you need a specialist, then you will go and see a specialist for whatever your issue or problem is. So it's a bit like me. I'm a death care practitioner. And if I don't have the answers, I know a man or woman who does. And in June, I will start to interview some of those men and women from African and Caribbean backgrounds who can tell you more about the work that they do and how special they are. And why do we do this? I'm doing this because, you know, we need to know, we need to be having these conversations, and we need to know who's there for us within our communities. We need to know their names. We need to know how to contact them. We need to know where they are located and whether they work online and whether they are prepared to travel. Now, Factho is the other website I have. It's www.facfo.org, and that's Factho, the Federation of African and Caribbean Funeral Operatives. And it is through that website that I am building a directory to help us to access our brothers and sisters when we are in a time of need. Simple things. There you go. It's easy. So let's talk about grief today and how our grief is colonized. Let's first talk about the word grief. What is grief? Well, a few weeks ago, I explained that grief is defined as the period of time within which pain and suffering is experienced after a loss. Okay? You don't just have to experience the loss of a loved one. Yeah? You don't have to just experience grief through death. We grieve for so many of our transitions in our lives. Many people leave, they grieve for their single status once they are in a relationship. They grieve for, you know, certain freedoms they may have now that they have certain responsibilities. One may grieve for their material losses. You know, like if you lose a purse, or a phone. You know, I've seen grown men cry because they have lost their mobile phone and it has had their whole lives on it, you know? So when it comes to a valuable item like a lost wedding ring or a car has been written off, like I had to what's the word I'm looking for? I lost my car recently. My car died recently. I had to scrap it. And, you know, I actually thought that I would be a lot worse off than I am. I'm actually coping okay. But, you know, I miss my car. I miss it deeply. When we grieve, it is because we have lost more than the life itself or the object itself. There is sentiment and there is pain behind every loss. You know, I'm saying that I miss my car because I would sit in my car for hours. I'd be in the car outside the house and I would just sit there and I would be gathering my thoughts and, you know, getting my life in order, you know, or I would be driving along motorways up and down the country to do my work. And so my car meant a lot to me because I've lost more than the car. I've lost my ability to move around freely. To an extent, I feel as if I've lost my freedom, you know, and yeah, my ability to listen to my music as loud as I like in my car without anybody saying to me, turn it down, you know, I've lost a lot in not having a car. And sometimes when you jump in the car, it's easy to just go about your business, run your errands, and just see your friends and go up and down places and just feel nice and irie. It's only when you lose something that you realize, wow, I really, really needed it. I really depended it. Especially when you've got to walk up hills. Like where I live, there's a lot of hills. So grief affects us in so many different ways. It's not unusual to grieve the loss of a friendship, a relationship, or a job, our health, or our sense of security. You know, we may yearn for our youth or our looks, you know, and as I've said, yeah, that ability to move freely, you know, our bodies are vehicles. In fact, I saw a video the other day that was saying that the motor car is based on the body. You know, so many things. The computer system is based on the body, how the body works. It is all quite intense and all quite interesting when you look at things and you take them apart. These bodies are replicated in so many different ways. Anyway, I digress. The grief that I tend to work with the most is that which relates to the loss of a loved one, given that that's my work. It's my calling. It's what I feel I came to work to life to do, to earth to do. But it covers so much more than that. The loss of a loved one is all prevailing, because it affects every part of our lives. It affects our bodies. When someone we love dies, there is not an aspect of our life that can continue the way it did, as if untouched. It throws our whole bodies out of kilter. A few weeks ago, I spoke about the grief wheel that I designed alongside the stages of grief that we have to navigate. And there is so much more than just the initial loss. So if you remember, I had the grief wheel, and you are at the center, regardless of the loss and your relationship to that person. Okay, you can have a mother who's got 5, 6 children. Her relationship with each child will be different because each child is different. We are all unique. And in turn, the relationship that she has with her partner, the relationship she has with her parents, people she works with, her siblings and her friends will all be different. In truth, there is one body, but within this body, we have so many different personalities that are playing out at any point of the day. They kind of come and go when necessary. And so our lives really are like a massive orchestra, you know, and we flow within this one body as one person. I am to you what somebody else would see as something completely different. You know, one person might see me and just instinctively don't like me. Others may simply see me and think, I love you. You know, everybody's different, and we're all triggered, and we all make decisions based on different aspects of our lives. So if somebody close within the family passes away, you know, we lose so much more than just them. We lose a second income, perhaps. We lose emotional, spiritual, or mental support. We may lose their sense of humor, you know, their guidance, their love, their company, you know, comfort and practical help. We may lose all of that. And you know what? Even if you don't like the person that dies, there is still a loss. Our ability to maintain a lifestyle for ourselves or our children may now be compromised, whether you liked the person or not, you know. And if you loved the person, then there may be things that our loved one did that we simply cannot do or struggle to do, you know. We may have to take time off work. We may have to stop work. We may have to move house. We may have to welcome children or other family members into our home, or even if we're struggling to cope, we may have to move people out of our home as we find a way to balance these new changes and adapt to a new life. So when somebody that we love dies, that person has gone through the transition of death, but we go through a life transition. And it's not easy. It's not an easy process. Okay. So as I'm saying, you know, the person that passed away, you may not like them. You may have been estranged from them. You may have had a rather tense relationship. Yeah. And alongside your grief, you know, there may be the fact that sorries were never exchanged, or closure was never gained, or questions now will never be answered. It's deep. Grief is deep. Okay. I know I talk about this a lot, and I talk about this from this perspective a lot because I have experience of losing somebody that I love. I've had experience of losing somebody that I wasn't too fond of. So I do stress it because it happens. Not everyone who dies is a great and wonderful person. And sometimes our grief can be confused within our emotions, because our relationship with a person is always going to be unique, regardless of whether this is within a family dynamic or a circle of friends or somebody at work or just in your life in general. Grief is universal. It's global. We all experience the pain of a loved one, regardless of their color, shape, size, or background. You know, we all do and say silly things. We all have our ups and downs, our good days and our bad days. And sometimes, you know, when we lose somebody that we didn't realize that actually we felt anything for, or when we lose somebody that we weren't too fond of, then we might be kind of taken back when they are no longer in our lives. And what I have found is that what is seldom acknowledged in the social sphere is that as this is a transition that we are experiencing, as we navigate our loss and our secondary losses, i.e., our finances, our status, our identity, our family dynamic, our learned beliefs, our ideologies, you know, which also sometimes are subject to change. Yes, they are. Because when somebody dies, you can be like, well, why did God allow this to happen? I've been worshipping him for so long, or her, and my loved one was never supposed to die. Sometimes we forget that, you know, from the moment somebody is alive, then a death has to come. And so when that comes, we find ourselves having to change our beliefs and our ideas and our ideologies and our hopes and our plans for the future, you know. Whew. Sometimes we change for the better, and sometimes we change for the worse. And we need to recognize the whole picture when we are working with or dealing with or living with somebody who has experienced a loss. Okay. And we have our loss. And if we're within a family, we probably also have to realize that everybody else is feeling a sense of loss as well. It's a time where anger can flare up amongst confusion. You know, it's a time when feelings of vexation and bitterness can arise. It is a time when people can turn against each other because they do not have the words that are needed to express how they feel. And maybe for some, because they didn't get the chance, they didn't take the chance because they were scared, timid, fearful, and then the chance is lost. As we continue with our lives as best we can, we find ourselves perhaps turning to substitutes that you know, we endeavor to use to mask our pain. We do it a lot. And again, it's not just when we lose a loved one. It could be because we've lost our job, our relationship, our home, our security, you know. So you might find yourself turning to alcohol or substances, food even, or even shopping to dull the pain. As I've said, we may become angry, but we may also become withdrawn. And we may be fearful of life without our loved one. Some people try to mask their grief by surrounding themselves with people and making sure that they're busy all the time. And, you know, they may take on more work or find that they are now so low that they can't get out of bed, let alone the house, you know, for even the basics. Grief is the kind of thing that will just shut you up. It will shut you a box. It will put you in your place. It will make you sit down. And yes, it does make you go through a period of introspection, because at the end of the day, there is nothing outside of us. Everything is within. So we have to go within to find ourselves, to find our strength, and to find our ability to continue. Okay. Many people do try to jump back into their lives and pick up where they've left off quickly, you know, as soon as they possibly can. They may try to get rid of their loved ones' belongings and just kind of remove every trace of them so that it's as though they were not there. Your grief is inside of you. It's not outside of you. So no matter how much you try to distract yourself with other things that are outside of you, you're always going to have to face that which is inside of you. And when you don't face it, it will manifest as sickness, either psychological or physical. Okay? So when our bodies are grieving, we feel it. And what we don't realize sometimes is that our body is different to our mind. So we may feel like we comprehend it in the mind. So, okay, I get it. He's gone. Let me go back to work. Let me sort this. Let me sort that. Let me get this up and running. Let me fix this. Let me do this. Let me go here. Let me go there. Let me, yeah. but then your body takes time and it kind of plays catch up with you, because if you're not acknowledging it in the mind, you're going to feel it because you won't acknowledge it in the body. And so your grief will be stored at in a part of your body, and that part of your body will be weakened. Yeah. And it may be weakened by anxiety, weakened by fear, weakened by resentment, weakened by anger, weakened by rage. You know, our bodies show us who we really are and where we really are. And if we haven't put two and two together to trace it back to, it's down to grief, then we can find ourselves being medicated for something that's completely different to what is actually necessary. And oftentimes, my brothers and sisters, what's necessary is for us to talk openly about our loss without fear of rejection, without fear of judgment. Okay. And so sometimes that's not easy, because we have been raised to keep our mouth shut, to keep ourselves to ourselves, to not talk about what's going on with us. And so when you see somebody who has lost somebody, when you see somebody often in general walking down the street, or, you know, just in life, well, they come to visit or you go to visit, normally when I say to somebody, how you doing? They say, I'm fine. I'm fine. Everybody is always fine. But when you dig down deep enough, are we really fine? Is anybody really fine? You know, our losses, our grievances, our life experiences, whether they are positive or negative, are all housed within the body, and the body doesn't forget. The subconscious mind does not forget. Okay? So if we have not addressed our grief, it may come as a shock when we start to feel pain in our body, and we might get concerned for our health. We might think that maybe we are having the same symptoms as the person we've lost, and we may feel that, okay, maybe what's happening to them is happening to me. That can be a fear in itself. We may find that we're losing our memory, or we're hit with a sudden depression. We may then pop ourselves off to the doctors to be medicated for something that we simply needed to talk about, which is our grief. And I know I say it time and time again. I know, you know, but when we are given medication, the medication that we're given is often to mask the thing that we are struggling with, suffering from, or experiencing. Okay, what we need to be doing is we need to be facing it head on. We need to acknowledge it, and we need to feel it within our body, and we need to address it. We need to look at it. We need to take it apart. That is painful. That is hard work, but it is oh so rewarding. And for me, as a grief and bereavement mentor and coach, my reward comes from seeing those breakthroughs, those aha moments, those I never thought of it like that times. And even I get them, you know, it's like, wow, I never saw that one. Yeah, okay, I didn't think of it like that. Oh, yeah, all right, that works, that works. And that's how we grow, okay? That's how we grow. We might find it challenging to reach out to those within our support circle, within our network, you know, and the reasons why is because maybe we feel that they know us too much, and so we can't speak freely because they knew the person that we loved who passed away as well. But then we may also struggle to approach those who are within the socially constructed support systems as well. Even more so if they are headed by those that do not look like us. So let's go back to our original subject for this afternoon, this morning, this evening. How is our grief colonized? Well, when those who are at the forefront of providing support with grief, if they are predominantly from a different culture, then we do have a problem. We have a problem. Okay. Last week, I explained the way in which funerals are generally viewed in our society from the academic, medical, and funeral sphere. They see the funeral as a means of disposing of the body. And I explained that the thought of it really irks me. And I wish that we could change the language around death, because if it were better, then maybe we would relate to it in a different way, because we live and we love, and yes, we experience death, which is a transition. The body dies, but our spirit goes on to somewhere else. Many of us believe that, it is met by ancestors, or that it goes home to God. Some people believe in that notion of hellfire, and punishment. And so if that's the case, and we're all holding beliefs that there's more to it than that, then surely we need to come together to readdress what that might look like. When those we love die, we don't think of their bodies as being merely disposed of. Where is the love? Where is the care and the respect? And is there any need for it if you're just disposing of something? Back in the day when I was younger, people used to throw rubbish out of their car windows as they sped along the road. Just throw a can of, an empty can of Coke out the window, or a packet of crisps, empty packet of crisps, or, just throw rubbish. People used to litter. I'm in the UK, and the UK used to be quite filthy with litter, discarded rubbish that once meant something because it was holding your crisps or it was holding your Coke, but we don't need it anymore, so we throw it away, So, yeah, I do rant over that word disposal. But if that is the language that's used by those of the dominant perspective, then how can we expect our deep sense of loss to be perceived any differently when those who are at the forefront of providing our employment or our education are working within the standards of those who are making those blanket rules and those blanket languages, using words such as disposal, around how death is handled, the language in general, in the workplace. Let's take the workplace, for example. The agency, indeed, they say that many employers with bereavement policies offer about 3 days of paid leave per loss. Think of it. You've lost somebody, you've lost a loved one, somebody that you've loved for, I don't even care whether you loved them for 60, 70, 80, 90 years of your life, or whether you loved them for 2 minutes or 2 days or 2 months, whether you've just met somebody or whether you've known them for a long time. There are company policies that are set that say that you're entitled to 3 days for immediate relatives, such as your parents and your siblings, your spouse or your children. 3 to 5 days. And fewer for extended relatives, such as your aunts and your uncles and your cousins and your grandparents. How is our grief colonized? Well, back in the day, Caucasian white people didn't want to look after Black children. They didn't want to be caring for our children in their nurseries or daycare centres or childminding. So we had to work shifts, and we had to balance our childcare needs with people within our community, within our church. Sometimes families used to live together, and it's not unusual for us to have an Auntie Punsi who's not actually a blood relative, but she's family, don't it? Because she's always been there. You've got your country cousins, them ones over there that we grew up with. We were always very close to. Our families were always tight. I call her mum Auntie, but she's not, but she is. How is our grief colonized? When Auntie Punsi passes away, who had a big hand in our upbringing, maybe she was your mum and dad's sister, but maybe she wasn't. But she had an influence on your life, and her children had an influence on your life. And she's died, and your boss gives you 2 days because she's only an auntie, isn't she? The HR company called Breathe, they typically say that compassionate leave in the UK is around 3 to 5 days long, and that the loss of an immediate family member, spouse, civil partner, a partner, sibling, and children is 2 to 3 days or less. For close relationships like grandparents and step parents, and 1 day for in-laws, aunts, uncles, and cousins. That naga work. It doesn't work. And I think that the overall allowance has become a little less rigid following recent times, i.e. COVID, because prior to COVID, I'm sure that the standard was like 2 days max for everybody. Remember, we live in a country, the UK is very stiff upper lip. We don't show emotions because, you know, we're tough and we're strong. We colonize the world. Why do we need to break down and take time for our grief? We don't cry, we kill. We slay. If we exist in a country that is governed by people who don't look like us, but are deciding policies and standards of behavior that you are expected to adhere to, because you fall within their jurisdiction, then you're duty bound to comply to their status quo. And for a long time, as far as they were concerned, they were not duty bound to acknowledge your needs. I say that knowing that despite efforts made, the structure of their institutions and their systems simply cannot allow it. They simply cannot allow it. But I think that's a conversation for another day. If you are unable to take more time off than the 2 or 3 to 5 days that are allotted, then you can take sick leave, you can take annual leave, you can take unpaid leave. And if you've got a great manager who is able to use their discretion, then maybe they will allow you to have like a special arrangement holiday, special arrangement break. Maybe they'll allow you to work from home, or they'll give you shifts that kind of work better for you. Phased return, you know, because ultimately they need you to return back to work. They need you to be on it and at top speed, because their stats and their bonuses depend on it. That's the truth. So when they call to check on you, it's because they want to remind you that although you have experienced a loss, you do have a contract to fulfill. Remember, the workplace is not a place for compassion or empathy. It's a business. And at the end of the day, the goal is to make money. So it's natural then that if you yourself die, they're not going to leave your job open. Somebody will complete the job description. They may tweak it a bit. They may add in a few more bits. They may rise the wage. They may lower the wage. And before you know it, someone else is doing your job. Okay. Although everyone grieves at some point in their life, grief isn't really seen as an issue that employers need to address, despite the grief index in America that measures sources of emotional pain ranging from miscarriages to pet loss reveals that the hidden grief costs in the USA amount to more than $75 billion annually. Think about it. In America, grief costs businesses on average $75 billion per year. In the UK, it is estimated that presenteeism, that's one of those words I'm going to have to figure out. It means being at work and being unable to function effectively. So that's affecting employees at work following a bereavement costs the UK economy £16 billion per year on average. And I personally think that that figure is wildly underestimated because we all carry grief. Behind our depression is grief. Behind our anxiety is grief. Why do we experience anxiety? Because we're thinking back on something that's happened in the past that was not addressed, it was not dealt with, it was not acknowledged. And so we can't see what the future is going to look like. Number one, because we're stuck in the past. And number two, we're thinking, how am I going to deal with it if it happens again? So, okay, I'm going to leave it there and come back to the break after the break. Well, we are coming to the top of the hour. So, yeah, okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play us out with a few songs and let's just think about this. Let's just give it some time to marinate. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play Bed Peace by, that's another name I can't pronounce. Jen, I'm going to say her name is Jen Aiko, but I've probably got it wrong. Hey, 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 it's DJ LP live on Passion Radio. I am back for the second hour of my show. How are you doing? I hope sincerely that you are well. And I hope that even though the subject that I'm talking about may not be at your top of the list of priorities, that it is, though, something that you are thinking about seriously, because we do need to be thinking about our grief, our death, and our funerals more seriously than we have done in well, since we've been dwelling freely in the UK. Do we dwell freely? Maybe that's another conversation for another day. But today we are talking about decolonizing grief. I have started this second hour with Melanie Fiona, You Stop My Heart. Beautiful song. But now let's continue with what we were talking about in the first hour, which is how our grief in the UK is colonized. Now, I do recognize that not everybody is perhaps tuning in from the UK. You may not be tuning in today. You might, come across this video in a month, a year, 10 years, 5 years' time. But you know what? I think that this is such a timely conversation. And I think that given the fact that our institutions are so deeply ingrained, whenever you actually come across this video will be the right time, for you. So yes, I am recording this. We are live on passionradiouk.com, but I'm also going to post this video to Zoom, this Zoom link to YouTube and to Facebook as well. because that's what I do. That's what I do. Also, as well, it will be posted on the FACFO website, and you can find all of these videos and the interviews that I will be having in the future, and some that I've had in the past, on FACFO TV. So most people will say, when you see it, like it and share. And so I'm going to ask you to do so, whatever you are moved to do at that time when you watch it. And yeah, leave comments as well. Like if I'm saying anything that touches you personally, let me know. And if I'm saying anything that you disagree with as well, please let me know. Let's have a debate. Let's have a conversation. I may even invite you to come and speak with me here on Passion Radio during this slot so that we can really talk about these issues, because what is necessary is conversation about how we are navigating ourselves when somebody we love passes away. So in the first hour, I was talking about businesses, I was talking about work and how our grief is colonized with regards to the business sector in the UK. Because regardless of whether you're working for a business, a company, an organization, or a charity, money have to make. And that is the simple down ground, zero level fact. All movement, all funding, all you know, everything is based on there being funds, you know, and circulating the pounds. But we need to be circulating our pounds in our areas. So what I noticed when I approached businesses in the UK to offer grief support, I found that grief support isn't really seen as important because it can be accessed freely from grief charities. So we have a problem. We have a problem. Our grief is colonized because although we all experience grief, we do so differently. No one has a completely identical experience of grief because we're all unique. And we are severely underrepresented in the social charities that offer that support. And even if we do get into those spaces, it is to provide unpaid and voluntary support and not the appropriate support that is in line with our needs, because they have standards and dictates that, you know, we're not really allowed to work outside of, because working outside of their belief of what's right and necessary, you know, working without outside of those remits will see us losing what little standing that we have. And when I say little standing, I mean barely there. We are barely there. We need more than that. We need people within our communities who are offering support with grief, because our grief is different. We don't grieve like others. Everybody grieves differently, regardless of their background. If you are from a different culture, then you're going to automatically and naturally gravitate to those ways of grieving that have been, you know, tried, tested, used, and stuck to. And those beliefs that are around them as well, which govern the way that we have that experience. You know, because oftentimes the reasons why we grieve are so because of the context from the time that has passed, but still affects us. Okay, so I spoke a few weeks ago about the Jewish community and how they still experience behavioral, what do they call it now? They call it trauma responses to the experiences that their ancestors had during the Holocaust. And so if that's the case, then surely we too, after 400 plus years of enslavement and colonialism, will also experience trauma responses. Now, those trauma responses may lead others to feel quite fearful But, you know, we are an expressive people. We are outstanding. We are vocal. We are passionate people. And when we love somebody and that person passes away, we do express ourselves, and we are colourful, and we are expressive and passionate because we feel. Our experiences are different. And as I've explained before, we also carry generational grief. We carry the grief of our ancestors who were not able to voice their pain and their hurt when they suffered a loss. We live in a country that freely acknowledges that it is institutionally racist. So if the body is to be disposed of and they are institutionally racist, well, where does that leave our grief? When support is coming from the same culture, you are able to interact that little bit better, that little bit easier, because there is common ground and familiarity. We tend to buck up upon the same life experiences and have an understanding of the importance of general behaviors and our beliefs and our rituals and traditions that have been carried down through our generations. Now, I'm of the diaspora, so I can only speak of my experiences as, you know, a British born Black girl of African further back and Caribbean heritage. Yeah, I can only speak of my experiences, but I know that different cultures, different backgrounds, you know, everybody, even if they originally from Jamaica, Africa, have their different ways. And then, you know, different families have their different ways, you know. And it's same for Asian countries and European backgrounds. Everybody has their few different ways. Everybody handles their grief differently. And we have our own way. But our grief is colonized because we don't fit the mold that has been laid out as a standard. Our grief is messy. Our grief is exuberant. Our grief is big when allowed to manifest naturally. But we can't manifest our grief naturally because we live in the UK, and the fences around grief are very narrow. I think that the issue that those from the diaspora face in the UK is the fact that we don't have a religion, and, you know, our businesses are very young. We don't have an education or a healthcare of our own. We don't have a language of our own. So we don't have public or traditional holidays like people from other cultures and backgrounds do. We don't have an Eid. You know, we have a Kwanzaa, but Kwanzaa doesn't really disrupt anything, and we're not all on board. We don't work independently together, and we don't have a specific cultural guideline. For example, you know, the Muslim people will have the Quran or the Torah. Some people have the Torah, the Vedas, the Upanishads. We don't have sutras or, you know, guided meditations as standard. Nothing that we can authentically call our own. We are changing. We are sort of, you know, they are coming up. We are designing them. We are creating them. We are changing our face, but that takes time. And until then, we have no standing. We have no general standard. We have no choice but to acquiesce to the status quo, which means then that our grief is smaller and our grief is contained within our bodies. The status quo doesn't work for us because it's not been designed for us. Okay? So let's talk about therapy. Sigmund Freud is considered to be the grandfather of psychology, and he's the founder of psychoanalysis. He's a psychoanalyst, psychology, and psychoanalysis. That's the word I'm looking for. He is the founder of psychoanalysis, and he was born in Austria. And he spent most of his childhood and his adult life in Vienna. And the Western therapy and counseling systems are based upon his interpretation of the brain and the standards that he set with regards to working with others. Obviously, over the years, it's been adapted, but he's sort of seen as the foundation and the originator of right practice. They gravitate back to him. He is like the base, the pinnacle. He is the grandfather. He is the author. He is the founder. He is the originator of so many of these methods and modes of healing that are seen as the right way forward. Unfortunately, Freud wasn't interested in the well-being of African or Caribbean people. He lived in a time that didn't recognize us as humans. He thrived during the understanding that we didn't feel pain or need any care or support. And his methods and his practices and his beliefs are still reflected on in the nation with regards to accreditation and acceptance into the field of counselling and therapy. So is our grief colonized? Yes, it damn well is. Our grief is colonized. And as I've said, when you don't have anything of your own, you will gravitate or you will cleave to whatever it is that you can. Especially if yourselves have been demonized and classed as subhuman. In all areas that I have trained in to do this work, I've come across the same type of person leading the narrative surrounding dying and grief. They are typically sort of over 55, middle-aged, middle-class white women. And I had an experience where I was listening on a grief helpline, and the lady who was taking the calls was that typical person that I have described. Unfortunately, one of our sisters, and I will call her a sister because then I can sort of differentiate between the two women, and she is from the Caribbean. She called in and she was at her wit's end. And I know she was at her wit's end because you're only really going to call these charities if you really need to, like if your community has let you down or if your church has failed you and you're not getting any kind of support to practical wisdom and guidance and protection from your friends or your family. This lady in particular found herself in that position, and she now had to send paperwork to the authorities, and she was opening and closing the envelope, opening and closing the envelope. She was locking the door and unlocking the door just to make sure that the door was locked. In her mind, it was like, oh no, I've not locked the door. Let me go and lock the door. She'll go there and okay, it's locked, but let me open it and close it again and lock it again. This is grief. Oh, I didn't seal the envelope, or oh, it's sealed, but have I got all the papers in there? Because if I get it wrong, then I have to do this again. Your mind is scrambled when somebody that you love passes away. On top of her grief, she had to go to the Caribbean because she had to sort out her husband's land, and his family didn't like her. And her husband had had several miscarriages, and I believe that they'd had a stillbirth as well. She was talking about this in the conversation. It was all coming up as a great big blur because her mind was scrambled. And the lady who was taking the call started to talk about her cats, of which she had 3 generations. And she was driving to take the kitten, the youngest one, to be spayed. And she was looking forward to the drive because it was lockdown. And she knew that she would have the roads to herself. And when she decided that she'd had enough of the call, she interrupted the sister, and she said that she was just checking to see how many callers were waiting to speak to someone. She hadn't heard a single word that our sister had said. She wasn't interested. She didn't understand. She didn't comprehend what is needed when you go to the Caribbean and deal with the authorities when it comes to land that isn't in your name. And, you know, the taxes that may have to be paid on the land, and finding somebody who can drive you to the local place where you need to get that stuff sorted out. She didn't understand any of that. She didn't comprehend it. It's a completely foreign language to her. And to this sister as well, because she wasn't actually from the country that her husband was from. And as I said before, his family didn't like her. So she was in turmoil. But this lady was talking about taking her cat to get spayed. So when the woman said, "Oh, I'm just checking to see how many calls we have holding," the sister kind of snapped out of her haze, and she apologized profusely. And she put the phone down. And I was so saddened. I was horrified. I was really angry. And I was unable to sleep that night. And, you know, I'm a nice person. But if I can't sleep because I'm thinking about you, I'm not nice. And I'm not likely to talk to you ever again, because my sleep is really important to me. And so I contacted the charity that I was working for at that time. And I said to them, I wasn't happy with the call. And I asked if it could be pulled for training as a resource, so that we could dissect it and understand what it was that was needed by the woman who had called. And they said that the calls are not recorded. And so that was an opportunity missed. And it wasn't seen as necessary because, well, we're all the same. And even though they appeared to be horrified by what I was telling them when I recalled the conversation, it went no further, because in truth, they were not interested in what I had to say. They were not interested in our auntie sister. And they were not interested in training the lady who had taken the call, or others who may find themselves in that same situation. They were not interested. And this is another reason why I had to create FACFO, the Federation of African and Caribbean Funeral Operatives, because we must help ourselves. We must have people in place who are able to catch us when we fall. You know, once I was asked by an academic researcher, a white woman who was doing some research on how they can make African and Caribbean grief that little bit easier. And when I spoke to her and I told her, rather much like what I'm telling you now, she turned and she just said to me, "So what can we do to make up for it? What can we do, what, as white people, what can we do to make it, you know, to make this problem go away?" And I explained to her that if I broke her leg, she wouldn't be coming back to me to fix it for her. So we need to do it ourselves. And, you know, we don't need any permission to start our own thing. And that's the thing that I struggled with, because it was like, I'm not recognized. You know, they're not going to recognize me. When I speak, they're not going to listen to me, because I am not fitting into the accreditation system that they have got, you know, laid bare for everybody to acquiesce to. I refuse to lay down for Freud. I cannot, and I will not. And I'm not slighting those who have got an academic accreditation so that they can do the work. I understand. I overstand that they've had to play the game in order to get that accreditation, whether they believe it or recognize his words as their truth or not. They've had to lead the merry dance, because the merry dance is what's going to pay your wage at the end of the day. And so there's been times, I'm sure, and I've spoken to therapists who have said that they have been so restricted and so isolated in their work because they can't work with their people the way that they need to, and they can't discuss it with their colleagues because there is no understanding. We don't need any permission to take care of our one another. And nobody outside of our culture can determine how we do that. Nobody outside of our culture can say whether it's right or wrong. Nobody outside of our culture can kind of determine what's acceptable when we are dealing with our grief, because they have no comprehension of what is necessary. In fact, this morning I was speaking to a sister that I've been working with, and I had said to her in a voice note a few days ago that maybe there is a chance that, you know, if you go to these systems, they're going to say to you, well, your grief is still kind of early, so come back in a few months' time. Come back in 6 months or so when your grief is more established. And she sent me back a message and she said, yes, that's what she got. When her husband passed away and she had finished with all the preparations and the funeral was done, she went to the local bereavement counselling office and she said to them, my husband has just died. I've just dealt with his funeral and everything and I need help. And she was dismissed. She was told, come back in 3 months because your grief is very young. And she said, what if I was suicidal? What if that was the time that I needed them the most? What she did was she battled through on her own, and she found that her family could kind of support her, but they hadn't experienced the loss of a spouse. They had experienced the loss of a father, the loss of a daughter, the loss of friends, but they hadn't actually experienced the loss of a spouse. And so she was lacking that support that she needed. And she's still lacking because she needs to find an organization that deals with or works with Black women who have lost their husbands. And, you know, the narrative is that Black women don't have husbands. That's the general narrative. So why would they make a structure for that? Why don't they just join up with white women who have lost their husbands so that they can drink tea and have a biscuit and yeah, deal with it that way? That's not our way. So I explained to my darling sister that, okay, if it doesn't exist, then we're going to have to create it, aren't we? We're going to have to create it. And in that sense, we're also going to have to create one for our brothers then who have lost a wife. You know, and we're going to have to create an organization or a group for our parents who have lost their children and the children who have lost parents. And I think that there should be a group for people who have lost their friends, you know. Okay, so we have a message from Mr. Bojangles. He has said SF is a fraud because none of, oh, okay, so Sigmund Freud is a fraud because none of his experiments can be replicated. He was also he also suffered from little hand syndrome. I've got no idea what that is. Little hand syndrome. Hence, therapy does not work for the majority of us. Hence, I stopped my training to be a counselor. They do not do talking therapy like us. What we need is talking therapy. So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. The last line that you've said, I don't know what you mean, and I'm not going to read it out. But I do welcome your messages. Thank you so much, Mr. Bojangles. We have therapists in the FACFO directory, And there are also counsellors and therapists at the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network. You can find them at www.batan.org.uk, and that is Bravo Alpha Alpha Tango November, BAATN, the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. So little hands syndrome, I'm definitely going to have to look this up, is to be in love with your mother in a romantic way and to want to have a form of intercourse with one's mother. That's coming also again from Mr. Bojangles, who is still typing. Little hand syndrome, gonna have to look that one up. There is also a fantastic support resource at the Lost Cafe, which is a free resource which is funded and founded by FACFO's Debbie Roberts. When I say it's funded, as in she ain't getting money to do this. And every other weekend she runs the Lost Cafe. It's founded by her. In truth, it's been going for the past 3 years, but she's been doing this work. She was running death cafes before that for everybody. As soon as COVID hit, she was like, right, need to set up something for my people. And it is very well supported, and you are very welcome. Sessions run every other Saturday from 2 till 4, and they are for us only. For those from the African and Caribbean and diaspora communities, Black people who look like us, who understand, stand and overstand what it is that we're talking about. Nobody else has a standing when it comes to our grief. Nobody else has the right to say anything, unless, of course, you're sitting in front of them and you give them that permission. But overall, we need to deal with ourselves. I personally provide group and one-to-one sessions, and I'm looking to start 3 weekly face-to-face group sessions in person in July, probably going up to September in West Yorkshire. Okay, so for more information on that, you can contact me on 07975 861089. You can also contact me at www.dipism.com. That's DIPISM.com. And you can contact me through FACFO. That's FACFO.org. My listing is there because obviously I have a listing, and Dipism is listed under FACFO as a person that you can contact if you need help and support with your grief. If you go onto that website, and I strongly urge that you do so, you will find other therapists as well. They work online, they work face to face, they're in your area. And I have people in my phone who are not on the FACFO directory, but they are ready and willing and waiting for you. Don't ask me why they're not on the directory. I've asked them to join, but you know, people are slow, so they will do so when the time comes. But yeah, you know, our grief is colonized, and I think that I have explained adequately why and how our grief is colonized. We are a different set of people. We are a great and beautiful, wonderful people, but we are led to believe that there is something wrong with us. And we are led to feel like there is something wrong with us because the systems that are in place, although available to us, are not designed for us. Okay, so we need to get together and we need to be designing our own thing. And I think that we are doing so the more we are coming across grief, the more we are experiencing it personally. And I think it's only through the loss of a loved one that we're actually going to wake up and open our eyes and realize that there's so much more going on in the world that we need to be on top of. It's only then, I think, that we really see the gaps in the system. And then we become professionals, we become experts because we know what we need. And it's not that hard for us to see where the gaps are. You know, even if you attend a funeral that is not been managed by somebody from our culture, you will see where the gaps are quite easily because they can't do it the way that we need them to do it. And at the end of the day, they're just disposing of the body. And so they're doing what they need to do. And that's all, and nothing above that. And so when we have our needs and when we have our wants and when we have our desires, you know, we can be turned away because our needs, our wants, our desires don't fit in with the narrative that is seen as the standard. What are we going to do about it? I'm asking you, what are we going to do about it? How long, how much longer are we going to stay in this position? Slowly but surely, we've got brothers and sisters who are stepping up. They're coming on board. They're becoming funeral operatives. But we have so many brothers and sisters in our communities who don't actually realize that they're doing the work. When they're supporting their friends and their loved ones, they don't realize that they're doing the work. I spoke to a sister the other day that I came across. I was in a community centre and I was speaking to somebody and I just said, yeah, my name's Laura Pusey. When asked, I just said, yeah, my name's Laura Pusey. And she was like, oh, yeah, we need you. I'm like, I don't know you. We started to speak about, you know, the work that I do, but, you know, from the perspective of as a DJ, and she had been following my hair journey. But, you know, she then started to speak about the loss that she had experienced of her mother a few months back. And, you know, grief is there. And she had nursed her mother leading up to her passing away. And now she found that she had time on her hands. And so many of us are in that situation where we have actually nursed our loved one. And now we have time on our hands. What are we doing then? Do we busy ourselves in the community? Do we sit down and take stock of our loss? Do we look to help others? It's a key and crucial time. I talk about sort of rushing to help others and rushing into things and, you know, having to be cautious and, you know, the need for self-care. But I've also found that in helping others, I have healed. When you're helping others who are also dealing with their grief and you've actually taken that journey, you've walked through it, maybe on your own, and you can see what's needed and what's lacking. You can help somebody that little bit easier because you know. And I said to somebody recently, if ever you catch me crying at a funeral, and that's going to be really rare, but if I ever shed a tear, it's not really for the person who has died. It is for those who remain, because I know what comes next. And when my father passed away, I didn't know what was going to come next. I had no idea. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. When he passed away, I lost my family. I lost so much. I lost him. I lost his friendship. I lost his support. I lost his guidance. I lost his sense of humor. I lost the feel of him. I lost the smell of him. I lost his natural way, his easy nature. And it was a double loss for me because I had never had it in the first place. Because even though he'd grown up in my house and he had been my dad and I had feared him and he had beaten me and we had had this estranged relationship that was based on fear from my perspective, I wasn't allowed to get close to him. because I didn't want to hurt the sensibilities of my mother. We're all very complex. We've all got very complex family dynamics. And just now, before this show started, I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I just said to her, she said, you know, I can't believe you actually said that to everybody in the group. And I said, I will talk about anything. I will talk about anything to do with my life. I will talk about any aspect of it freely. I will speak about it openly. You can ask me any question on anything, on any platform. It's very rare that I'm going to be like, oh, I can't speak about that, because I'm not precious. There's nothing that I have gone through that somebody else hasn't gone through, especially within our community. This is a story. I'm living Laura. I'm living the story of Laura in this lifetime. And when I pass away, when I'm finally permitted to lay my body aside, then I will go on and I will start a new story somewhere else, and I will have a new experience, and I will have new challenges and battles that I have to face. But in the meantime, whilst I'm here and I'm in Laura's body and I'm living Laura's life and I'm carrying Laura's face, I'm going to talk about Laura's journey, so that other people might be able to then say, oh, that happened to me. Oh, I had that experience. Oh, I thought I was alone. Oh, I thought I was unique. Oh, I thought that that couldn't happen to anybody else. Oh, I was told that I had to keep my mouth shut, so I didn't say anything. I kept it to myself. You know, being African, Caribbean, of the diaspora, Black, British, whatever label you want to put on yourself, being melanated and living in the UK is a very, very narrowing experience. It's a very narrowing experience. And we do not realize how caged in we are. We do not realize the extent to which our lives are controlled and governed. And I will say, I'm talking from the perspective of, you know, a 40-something African, Caribbean, British born Black girl of the diaspora in the UK. But, you know, the lives of white people is also colonized. They are narrowly guided, you know, and herded in directions. They may have the privilege of being white, but it doesn't stop them from being poor. And the same can be said for Asian people, maybe not poor, but, you know, there's rich and poor people in every background. You know, we have rich and poor people. It's just, we have grief as well. And we need to handle our grief, and we need to talk to people about our grief. We need to talk to each other about our grief. We need to have an overstanding. We need to have a standing about our grief. Let me explain the table of standing. I'm not going to go all the way to the top, because then that will be giving my secrets away. You know, there's so much to say. I'm in a position at the moment where I'm finding that I'm giving too much away and I'm not charging, and so I'm not making any money, so I'm not generating, and I'm giving and I'm not really receiving, you know, numeration for the giving, and so it's burning me out and I'm getting weaker. So I'm really trying to just kind of slow myself down and pace myself. So, you know, I've realized that on so many topics, I have no standing. I have no form of recognition. I have no form of awareness. You know, when it comes to running a business, I am learning. There are so many areas of running a business within which I have no standing. I don't understand. I don't even stand under the authority of somebody else. I refuse to stand under the authority of somebody else. So it's very rare that I will say, I understand. You know, if I respect you, then I will understand what you're saying, and I will accept your guidance or your words or your sentiment. You know, if you are expressing to me your grief or how you're feeling or the experience that you've had, then I will understand. I will stand under your words and I will listen to you and I will form an understanding based on what you've said. But, you know, when it comes to many of these institutions and structures that we have been herded into, I have no standing. So I hope you understand what I'm saying. Or I hope then that you have standing. I hope that I have explained myself clearly enough now so that you stand. You have standing. You stand what I'm saying. And you are able to use your knowledge and your wisdom and your experiences and your powers to stand in awareness, in consciousness. You stand. When you overstand now, you're like, oh, I fully get it. I embrace it. I recognize completely what you're saying. I absorb it and I know it to be true. Yeah. And I can, what's the word I'm looking for? I can recognize it to be true. I fully embody it. I'm trying to find the word and I can't find it. But when you have an overstanding, then you are an authority. Yeah. We need to have an overstanding on our grief. We need to have an overstanding on our death. We need to have an overstanding on our end of life experiences. We need to have an overstanding on our funerals. We need to have an overstanding on what our needs are, on those traditions. You know, when I was younger and somebody died, my dad would pour alcohol onto the carpet. What are you doing? He's like, this is for, you know, this is for whoever has passed away. This is for our ancestors. This is for our family members who are not here anymore. And I was like, oh, right, okay. You're just wetting up the floor. And then I went on to learn about libation. Yeah. Do I have an overstanding on libation and pouring libation? No, I don't. I stand. I stand. And so when somebody has an overstanding on pouring libation, I happily acquiesce to their knowledge and their wisdom because I have standing. I don't have overstanding. And there are so many things that I do not overstand. When it comes to dying, death, and grief, I am developing my overstanding and an inner standing. An inner standing is what's coming next because I'm working with the spiritual. So I have to have an inner standing of what actually death is and what actually happens when we die, when we lay our bodies aside. And with overstanding and with an inner standing, I can confidently share what I am learning and be remunerated for it. I can confidently teach others so that they too can then go on to stand and overstand and help those that come behind them. And this is how we strengthen. This is how we grow and this is how we learn. And there are people out there who have an overstanding of when it comes to business. And so I'm quite happy to take guidance from them and understand, try to understand what they're saying. Okay, well, I see that we've run out of time. I see that I've not been looking at the clock, and the chances are that the advert has come on for Passion Radio, but I'm going to play us out with a song anyway. This is Adorn by Miguel.